Hello everyone, this is China Paradigm, where we, Dashi Consulting, interview seasoned entrepreneurs in China. Hello everyone, I'm Matthieu David, the founder of Dashi Consulting, a China market research company in China, based in Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong, and its podcast China Paradigm. And today, I'm with Rami Blachman. I hope I pronounced well your name, I asked before. Did I?
Yes, you did.
Thanks. The founder of China Israel Innovation Accelerator. You have been in China for a while, and you have done a lot of things that will raise a lot of questions, actually, for me in the past. You have worked in finance in China with financial institutions, with foreign financial institutions and Chinese financial institutions, and also with government, local governments in Nanjing, in also Haikou and Hainan, and you are now in charge of Israeli Innovation Accelerator, where you support the growth and the entry of Israeli companies, mainly tech, mainly a lot of startups, I believe. And you made recently a presentation in Nanjing where you covered those topics about comparing US and China for a market entry. Comparing the opportunity of going to China for Israeli startups, companies, and comparing to the US. So thank you very much for being with us. Currently, could you tell us a bit of the size of what you do? How many companies are in your accelerator? How many cases have you dealt with? Could you share a little bit of where it is in terms of development?
Yes. So first of all, thank you, Matthieu, for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here at this podcast for Dashi Consulting. So I would add to my background that I think my DNA basically is to be a startup entrepreneur. So that's where basically, in terms of my mindset, that's where I come from. So I've been doing that for quite a while in the US, in Israel, and in China. Europe also, I would say. I'll speak to that soon. But I've been, I guess, pretty fortunate to have been on the side also of the other side, the funding side, the investment side. I've had a chance to work with Chinese investment groups. I worked in Hangzhou for 4 years with Zhejiang Zhongda, which is a large local conglomerate, working with their investment arm on joint ventures in the US and Israel, and also with others. And more recently, the cities, I think, in China have been having a higher profile. Cities like Nanjing, Haikou, Changzhou in Jiangsu province, Suzhou, of course, Guangzhou, Xi'an, Qingdao, and I can go on and on. Many of these cities seek to become, magnets for innovation and entrepreneurs, for digital nomads, so to speak. And they have big budgets, and they take many steps to attract and lure these, foreign innovators. So I've had a chance to work on that side in China, and also on the side of the foreign startups. And now when I say startups, I think it's important to define the term. Because when you say startups, most people have it. Yeah, feel free to jump in. Most people have in mind, a couple of young people just out of college, sometimes dropped out, sitting in a co-working space with a, very exciting PowerPoint presentation. When we say startup in the startup world, so to speak, we mean anything from that to Uber. So Didi, Zhongxing, and Uber, until Uber went public, the whole range can be defined as startups. Now, typically what it is a technology company, I think. A technology company that raises money, typically, and then goes through a very rapid growth rate. So that was very important to define this, I think. Let's call it maybe technology companies, because that doesn't keep us necessarily in a very early stage. It could be growth stage, Series A, Series B, companies that raise even tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, or just pre-seed. So working with, mostly Israeli-based companies, also, European and American, but I think Israel is a very, very interesting case in point, because for 25 years, companies based out of Israel have been, you know, expanding and growing into the US market, Silicon Valley. Israel is like a microcosm of Silicon Valley in many, many ways. And all of a sudden, in the past 2 years, China is in the, you know, front and center. It's not just another market. It is, you know, stands alongside the United States as a playing field for growth, for becoming a unicorn, you know, for creating huge value over a short time span. Now, the China Israel Innovation Accelerator is a framework that I founded about a year ago. I think we are pioneers. You know, pioneers has good aspects, and it's very challenging also, because you're kind of breaking into the market, and that's never an easy thing. What I can tell you is that many startups are very cautious, I would say, about entering into the Chinese market. And we could talk about that for a long time. What are the reasons? But for European or Israeli, you know, I think the Chinese market, on the one hand, is a huge opportunity at this time, but there are also many, many challenges. And the China Israel Innovation Accelerator basically collaborates. The model is to collaborate with different landing pads. So places like XNode Shanghai or InnoSpace Shanghai, that I'm sure you know, Nihab Hangzhou, Nanjing. We went to Nanjing Tech Week last month and brought about 10 Israeli companies there for matchmaking. Haikou, the city of Changzhou has a China-Israel, you know, park, so to speak. All of them are looking into having these companies land and launch there. So this is the China Israel Innovation Accelerator is a framework that has different kinds of programs. It's not like a batch, you know, plug and play or Y Combinator or, you know, these that you go and you have, you know, 10 companies for 3 months. It's not quite there yet. It's more like a case-by-case basis for these startups to, you know, to land successfully.
So what do you offer exactly? Is it a training? Is it expedition, like we say, learning expedition, where you bring those companies to China to meet with partners, to meet with people, to understand the market? Could you give a case to for the people who listen to us to really understand what you do and you offer?
Yes. So it could be, you know, a company in a certain, you know, let's take the automotive, for example, right? The smart mobility, which is China is very important, you know, dominant player there, and there are hundreds of deep tech technology companies in Israel. Now, the first step, typically, usual situations, but typically a first step could be, you know, a 3 or 4 day orientation in, you know, one of the cities, or in, you know, Nihab, Hangzhou, or in one of the places where the company, 1 or 2 companies, can come and they can just find out what this place is all about. You know, what are the matchmaking possibilities? Because the one thing that one thing we need to understand about Israeli startups, that they have raised, many of them have raised money locally from Israeli and US VC funds. So they've raised anywhere from, you know, 1 to 2 million, 10, 20, 50 to 100 and over. And they are very, very focused, laser focused. And they need to know, you know, the one thing that's most important for them when they look at China is market. Not necessarily for fundraising, you know, that's a kind of a secondary issue, concern. The most important thing is we land in China, how are we going to get into a project? You know, the proof of concept, a pilot project, you know, with a customer. In China, there's the government is always a very important player in the background. So we address these points. How do you take this step by step to help these companies commercialize the right way without losing focus, losing time, and going, you know, back and forth on and on?
How do you do to assess it? I feel that a lot of companies are attracted by China because of the size. But as you said, they realize that the environment is very different, that it needs a lot of localization, it needs a lot of changes, including technology. Technology is not the same. It could be different APIs, different software, etc. How do you assess if it's a early enough, it's too early, or the good time for them to go to China?
It's a case-by-case basis. It's really a case-by-case basis. I would say that sectors, verticals have characteristics. So, smart mobility, for example, is a longer-term game because the major OEMs, as they call them, the big brands, the Volkswagens and the BMWs and the Fords and so on, and the Chinese car makers, right now they're in the process of designing the next generation car that will be rolled out, let's say, in 2021 or so. So the technologies right now are rushing to integrate into that, into the design specifications of these. So that's a longer term, and there are some characteristics that are typical to that. If you look at e-commerce or digital marketing, it's very different. So the go-to market is quick there. You get into, and then, that can happen very fast. That's one way to categorize it. Another way is to look at the companies, the startups, as we call them, the technology companies. What point in their life cycle should they enter into the Chinese market? We've gone, through different assumptions in that, and there's no one true answer. So if you look at the earlier stage companies, those between the seed and A round, let's say, that would seem maybe too early sometimes. But we think that in many cases, companies at this early stage that have already raised, let's say, $1 or $2 million, and I think this is something that I felt, and this is a requirement. You don't want to approach the Chinese market just with no cash. That's not the right thing, that, in my opinion. So these earlier stage companies, they're more open-minded, because they typically don't have the very, a structured system, and they're open-minded as to which direction to go to. If you look at the companies that are, that have already maybe 100 or 200 employees that have raised 50, and they've raised 20 million, 30 million, and they have an office in the US, you think that typically they would be more mature and ready for the Chinese market, which is true. But the downside is that they cannot get distracted. So many times they will say, sure, like company like RB Robotics, which is they have a radar system driven by a smart algorithm that is, sensor and the eyes of the car of the future, of the driverless car. And they have a Beijing office, and we're very close to them. We talk to them very often. And they've made the decision to set up an office in China. But other companies will say, listen, this is something that we'll do in Q2 2020. So, it's a case-by-case basis.
You are mentioning technology company from the West, especially Israeli company. So far, we know a lot of foreign companies like in luxury, in cars, and so on. We have some success in China. But for technology company, the ones we know mostly had failures. Like Uber. I mean, Uber was a success until 20% of the market share, and then was bought by David-Experton. When you look at then Google and so on, they are just forbidden. So do you have some cases where purely tech companies have been successful in China? I remember another case, which is Koros Automotive, which is from Israel as well, I believe, a joint venture between China and Israel. Koros, Q-O.
Koros, yes.
And
yes.
It's difficult for me to name very successful tech companies. Do you have examples from the West, from overseas? Do you have some examples, cases?
That's a very, very good point. There are not many success stories. Uber is an interesting case in point. We know what happened there. Uber went in and then went out in a way. And then, has a shareholding in Didi, right? That's what it does today. We see Airbnb, they're trying to localize. I don't know to what success, right? That's questionable, but at least they're making significant effort. Maybe the tourism industry, the Booking.com is a very interesting company that has huge stakes in Ctrip and in Didi, and they've made a huge commitment, multi-billion-dollar commitment to China. And in the Shanghai, subway system, you see their advertisements everywhere. But these are, some examples. If you look at Israeli companies, they're usually not that big. And there are a few early signs of success stories. One company, for example, is Mellanox. Now, Mellanox is not a startup. Mellanox has revenues of about $1.5 billion. And they were acquired by NVIDIA from Silicon Valley a few months ago for $7 billion. And they do switches and routers for data centers. So this is like infrastructure company. We took them to Nanjing Tech Week in late June. And this is a company, I think, that has at this point something like 15 to 20% of its sales in China. They have a very nice office in Shanghai, Mellanox, Israel-based, that was traded on NASDAQ for a long time, and then was, as I said, acquired by NVIDIA. So this, one of the low-profile but pretty successful companies that are building nice market share. That's one example of the bigger companies. Now, if you look at the startups, let's say, you see the early signs of hopefully some success. So one example is a company called Innoviz, I-N-N-O-V-I-Z, also developing LiDAR solutions for autonomous vehicles. And they have raised $250 million from a bunch of investors, some of them Chinese, Shenzhen Capital Group and a bunch of others. And they're in Israel based and in the US, the typical model. And they have an office in Shanghai also, and also connecting and working with the OEMs and the tier one suppliers of equipment to the OEMs, to the brands. And they are, it's a little too early to say if they're really becoming commercial because, we have to see when the cars roll out in 2021, to what extent Innoviz will be a part of that. I could go on talking about this because I'll just say it's interesting because Elon Musk is in the school of thought that LiDAR has no chance in the market. And on the other hand, you have people like the investors in Innoviz spending hundreds of millions of dollars in startups developing this technology. So, who knows? I'll give you one more example that I think is that I really like these people because I think they did a superb job. A company called Temi, T-E-M-I. Temi is a maker of home personal assistant robot. This thing that goes around home. It has, it's not going to bump into things because it has VSLAM system that enables it to see what's going on in the environment. This company raised about $50 million 2 years ago from John Wu. John Wu is the ex-CTO of Alibaba. And through a consortium of investors in Singapore, they invested $50 million into Temi based in Israel. And now they have a really, I think, good, I would say, China headquarters in Shenzhen. And in September, they're beginning to take delivery or deliver on orders into China. And they're working with retail chains so these robots can guide people to wherever the store. It's really nice presentations that they're doing. So this is a company, I think, that's making inroads as a Chinese company, but it also has, Western Israeli American part to it that is separated, but the technology is shared through these two platforms. I think these are some examples of success stories. It's not going to be easy, but I think and hope that we're going to see more and more of these.
Interesting, because the examples you take are both companies which are on the radar, like Booking.com, like Airbnb, where everyone knows about them, and some companies which are more industrial, which are more hidden because they work more in B2B. So maybe some part of it is actually hidden because a lot of them are within B2B and less known. You talk in your presentation you made in Nanjing about the a secret sauce from Israeli startup, the Silicon Valley DNA, and chutzpah. Could you tell us more about what you mean about chutzpah? I have no idea what it is. To spell it, you spell it Chutzpah. Maybe I didn't pronounce correctly.
Yes, it's a word actually in Hebrew and in Yiddish. You know, Yiddish is the language of the old language of the Jewish people in Europe. Yes, that is a very good point that you made, that Israel is very much B2B. That's true, because there's no local market, you know. That's why many of the startups that hatch are B2B, maybe 80% or 85%. That's true. What is the secret sauce? That is something that people ponder and talk about. But I think the fact that Israeli startup founders, because there's no local market, there's no local capital, they had to start with the United States market. And that's, the culture is close, you know, many things are very, you know, the two countries are very close together, but still it's a very difficult leap. Because Silicon Valley, you know, we all know what it is. It's a huge, massive, powerful platform. And, you know, it's hard to break into it. And these small upstarts from Israel had to develop certain skill sets, certain mindset over the years to do that. And they were able to do that. And typically the model that has worked really, really well is keeping the R&D in Israel. You know, keeping the programmers and the software engineers and so on, most of them in Israel. However, setting up the office, the sales, the product, the management, the marketing in the US for the most, some in Europe, of course, mostly in the Bay Area. Some, for example, New York City, you see many companies around media or fintech, you know, or content. You see a lot of that in New York. And Boston is a lot of, I would say, medical device and healthcare. So over the years, this has developed into a very successful model. And we've seen exits. So I would say that the secret sauce, as we say, is first of all to have that Silicon Valley DNA, which means many things. You know, it means that you're professional and that you are very focused. Really, really important. You raise capital and you have to achieve these goals very quickly. There's certain things that, you know, you have to carry yourself in a certain way, a professional way. You are accurate and so on and so on. So this is something that has worked well. Now we need to apply this to China. And China is different in many, many ways. Whereas I can just give an example, in the Western US culture, things are very open, right? So you meet someone, you don't necessarily need to be friends. You know what the resume is, you know who they know your resume, maybe someone made the introduction, and then you're ready to talk business, right? You can send an email with a term sheet. That doesn't happen in China. No way. And that is something that, you know, time and time again, both sides face. The one side, the Israeli side says, okay, we had a good meeting. Let me send you a, you know, bullets via email. But then the Chinese side is a different, you know, place altogether. Maybe the people were not decision makers. They still need to know who these people are because they're a small company from the other side of the world. They need to build up the trust and the relationship, which is so important in China. So the email is not even, they don't reply the email sometimes. And that's when these things fall apart. So to answer your question, the secret sauce, the thing that has worked so well for Israeli companies needs to be adjusted to be successful in China. It needs to be localized. I think that is the most important thing that people, I think, like you and me, understand profoundly.
One thing you said, keeping the R&D in Israel, can it work really in China where, again, the technology environment is very different? If you have a Facebook font, Facebook API or Google font in your app, it will not be able to be used in China or not be able to be very fast in China. You have to put a server in China and the DNS don't work the same actually between the West and China. Do you think the ID can still stay in the country where the company has started for China?
Again, this is a good question. The answer is yes, but there are more complications. The infrastructure, much of it needs to be in China, as you say, because the Chinese law requires that data be hosted and resides in China. So you have to use, let's say, cloud providers, Aliyun or AWS in China. That makes it more complicated, but that's the cost of doing business in China. That's life. That requires more resources, but I think that the essential strength of Israeli startup companies that they have these developers and the programming and the R&D in Israel. They have to keep that, and they will have the China operations maybe a little bit different than the US. You know what I'm saying? So they will keep the model, but they need to adjust it because this is a winning model in many ways.
In the presentation you did in Nanjing, for where you were with Israeli companies, or really tech companies, not to use the word startups, you mentioned 5 sectors where you see a potential because they are Israeli tech companies and because you believe there is a market in China, as far as I understand the message. So one is urban tech, one is food agro tech, the other one is clean tech and new energy, e-commerce, logistics, and digital marketing, the 4th one, and 5th one, medical device and digital healthcare. I think the one which is the most new to most people, the most surprising, is what we call urban tech. Would you mind elaborating on what you call urban tech? And what is even more surprising is that you have listed 1,200 startups in Israel doing urban tech plus IoT. Sorry, you have IoT as well. IoT is maybe more understood now. But could you elaborate more about the potentials that overseas companies, and especially the Israeli startups and companies you see, have in China for urban tech and IoT?
Yeah, urban tech is like an umbrella term, right? It's something that consists of many things that basically the idea is to improve the lives of people who live in cities, because we see that urbanization is a trend that is growing, right? There are more and more people moving to big cities, particularly in China. It's going to be it's already more than 50% in China. In the Western world, it's much higher than that. So urbanization is very important. How do you make life in the city better? And there are many aspects to it. One aspect is mobility. How do you transportation in the city? Another aspect are the buildings. So we need to have what's called smart buildings, smart homes. Then there's also the IoT. IoT, another term for it is edge devices, edge computing. So
yeah, Internet of Things. Basically, the idea with IoT is that everything is going to be connected. When in the future, when you sit on a chair, will be connected to know your weight, to know how healthy you are, whatever. That could be the fridge will be connected. This is the IoT world. So you believe also it will connect the city.
Yes, it'll be in people's homes. It'll be on the consumer side, and it'll be on the municipal side. So you have, the lighting systems will have every edge device, basically the sensors, the cameras. Needs to have some computing. And this is a huge challenge because it takes energy and it takes electricity, and how do you power that? And how do you feed that back to the cloud? So this is another aspect of it. There's also the aspect of security, right? There's education. There is, recycling. There are many, many things under urban tech. In fact, we as a part of the delegation to Nanjing, we had with us to join us High Road Center, which is an incubator based in Tel Aviv, High Road Center. And they come from industry background. So they're backed up by, government, municipal road building and infrastructure building companies. And it's a platform that screens for and invests in companies that are in urban tech. And they have really nice, something like 10 portfolio companies now. They've just been in business for a year. And they came to Nanjing with a few of their portfolio companies that were very early stage. So companies that raise $50,000 or $100,000, let's say. And they focus on urban tech. So that is something that is extremely relevant to China, of course. And we see that a lot of the initiative, as I was saying earlier, comes from cities. So you have the central government, of course, providing the motivation and the budgets many times, and the marching orders, right? So they'll say, this is where we're going. And then you're going to see the city level, sometimes the district. So in the case of Nanjing, you have Nanjing City, you have Jianye District, Jianing District. In Shanghai, you have, Qihui, Zhangjiang, and so on, Yangpu, and so on. So on. Each district takes the initiative in each city. So we really believe that that urban tech, in the very broad sense of the term, is something that's going to be extremely relevant to China.
That's one thing I wanted to ask you, and to elaborate more on how government can drive innovation, how government can actually be a platform for overseas startup and tech companies to enter the Chinese market, because they will ease their entry, but also because they will use their solution. So you are business partner of Jianye District Municipality, so in Nanjing, and you are also business partner in Haikou Fuxing Town Internet Innovation Park in Haikou, Hainan. And you mentioned that Qingdao, Xi'an, Zhengzhou, they have a lot of budget. Could you explain us what's happening exactly? Because it looks like a dream. They have a budget. They want you. They want to invite you. Wow, let's go. It sounds like so easy. Could you explain a little bit the backstory? What's behind this? Is it because the officials are rated on the GDP growth or innovation ranking? Is it that they have actually not a budget, but they offer free space and actually they can provide a loan? Or is it free budget they open? Could you explain more about what's the ecosystem with those parks and those municipalities which help innovation and overseas companies going to China?
Yes. So the cities need to position themselves for the future. Every city dreams of being Silicon Valley, but not everyone can do that. But they still try to be a hub of knowledge. They look at, Beijing, and Beijing is huge. They look at Shanghai. Shanghai is also, everybody knows what Shanghai is. Shenzhen and the Greater Bay Area, that's the kind of mecca for hardware anywhere in the world, manufacturing. And so these other cities, they don't want to be left behind. Now, we also see a phenomenon in China that I think is very unique. You see the parks, the tech parks, right? There's so many of them. I think there are probably hundreds of them all over the country. And these are driven by a real estate mentality, because that's how China, that was the engine of growth for China. That's how many people made money. And they have all these parks, and they're saying, hey, we're going to allocate the parks and let the foreign companies come. And that's going to be good for everyone. They're going to get, subsidized office space and so on. The thing is, the issue here in the heart of the matter is that for technology companies, it's not a real estate question. So they don't think about parks. It's not like a huge multinational company with plants and factories. Most of them don't have that. It's a bunch of people sitting in front of computers, or maybe they have a workshop, but it's not huge space. They don't need the thousands of square meters. And that's where there's another gap here between these foreign entrepreneurs and startups and innovators and what the Chinese cities want to offer. So they're saying, come, we'll give you free office space. Number one, these founders, they're not looking for free office space. They're way beyond that. They're looking for market. And number two, it's not a question of just filling up the parks. Really. So this is one source of, gap. This is one of the gaps. Now the cities, they're looking to lure and attract the foreign, because they want to, transform and be hubs of knowledge and not fall back. But the thing is, they're not really sure how to do this. And they try different things. So you see a lot of tech and innovation events. Every city in China, you know, tier 2, tier 3 cities also have these events, and they're trying to invite people from abroad. Now, to what extent these people from abroad come, to what extent these are influential key players from abroad, that's the question. Because in many, many cases, the foreign entrepreneurs in Europe or in Israel or in the US or maybe other places, they don't know the second tier cities. You know, they've heard of Beijing, they've heard of Shanghai, right? Some of them have heard of Shenzhen. But when you say Qingdao, when you say Nanjing, when you say Xi'an, you know, why would we go there? If we're not just looking to travel, if we're looking for market, if we're looking to match with potential customers, if that's what we care about, what is the purpose of going to this place for a 1-week event, for 1 month, for 2 months, for 3 months? That's the question that the cities need to address. And so, you know, people like me, what I would say, the solution to that are curated solutions. So these governments, they don't do the business themselves, right? The government officials, we know that. But they have the power in China. First of all, they have the money and they have the influence. So they can say, okay, here's a company from Israel. And this company, you know, does, let's say, robotic warehousing solutions driven by AI and machine learning and so on. This company is a very good fit for Nanjing because Nanjing does these kinds of things and wants to be a leader in these kinds of things. So we, as the government, we are going to say, okay, here's a local company in Nanjing that has warehousing for JD.com or Alibaba or other players. You guys we're going to allocate some space for you, some warehouse space. We're going to fund this also. We're going to put 10 million RMB. You guys run pilot projects here. So I think these kinds of curated projects, commercialization projects, that is something that can work very, very well.
I see. When you are saying business partner of a municipality, what it is exactly? Are you you bring business to them? What's the duty you have?
The thing is that I and my company have been screened by the local authorities, by these government officials, and we are a qualified, certified business partner. So it's like, you know, let's say you are a supplier to Walmart. You're inside the billing system. It means that you are a certified supplier and business partner. So that means that we are open to doing business, and if they want something from Israel, if they want a delegation to visit, or they want, you know, there's an event in the city or in the district, and they want to have a couple, you know, some Israeli companies, we are the natural partners to do that.
Does it mean that you have a specific access to them, or specific, you can actually have access to specific programs and so on?
That's the idea. Yes, yes.
Could you give some ideas about what kind of specific programs you got access to?
Well, as I said, number one is, you know, many of these cities, they want to send delegations. There are many delegations from China coming to Israel, and they come for 3 days, 2.5, 3 days. You know, so they want to meet startups and incubators, and they want to get a good picture of what's going on here. So we will do this kind of service for them. That's one example. Or Nanjing, Jianyi, Nanjing Tech Week, the end of June, they wanted 10 or so Israeli tech companies to come. So we were communicating this, communicating the program and just handling everything to bring these companies to the event and then be there throughout the event with them, with the matchmaking, which is the most important thing for them, in the exhibition, keynote speaking, panel speaking, and so on. These are just 2 examples.
You mentioned that the second sector which would need startups and Israeli companies, which is food and agro-tech. At the same time, you are advisor at AgriNation Venture Capital, which, based on the name, I think has a link with agriculture. Again, similar questions about agri-tech and food in China and innovation. have you seen some success in China linked to agriculture and agri-tech? I'm going to elaborate a bit more. Agriculture is very strategic for China. It is within the 5-year plan that it should be Chinese in order to actually making sure that there is enough food for the country to be independent. So it's a strategic matter. And some companies, actually, in the past, I know one, had to sell its shares. It was a French company, joint venture with Chinese companies, had to sell its shares at fair price, at market price, to the Chinese counterpart because it became part of the plan as strategic. And no foreigner could be able to create element within the food chain. So would you elaborate a bit more about what kind of segment do you think in agri-food, agri-tech are examples of companies which are or have been successful in China?
There has been a company, companies that for example, in smart irrigation systems that have been successful in the past. Now, what you're talking about speaks to the issue of intellectual property. In some cases, in some ways, I think. So there's a joint venture. What happens to the intellectual property? It could be in food and agri-tech, it could be in others. And to what extent do Chinese authorities and in general the market respect IP of foreigners? So I will just say a few things about this that I think, and we know that it's not my opinion, it's we see that everywhere, that there's been a huge progress in China in terms of protecting IP. First of all, there's an IP court system in China. And the track record of protecting the rights of foreign companies is very high. So still there's a long way to go, right? And this is a part of the US-China trade war. But we see right now that IP is a huge issue in China because the Chinese companies have their intellectual properties. So we see Xiaomi, suing other companies and Huawei and everybody. So it's in their best interest to protect IP. This is good news for the foreign companies. Yes, agri-tech and food tech is a strategic industry and vertical for many countries, particularly in China, for historic reasons and for many other reasons. They are attracting, really interested. I can say that one of the, I don't want to mention names, but one of the most famous international Silicon Valley-based, innovation platforms that has a presence in China contacted me last month, I think, a couple of weeks ago, and I met with them in Shanghai, saying that many multinationals and Chinese companies want to source agro and food tech companies. And Israel is, one of the leading countries in this. So this is something that's, of key importance. There are some success stories. I think we have to look at what's happening in the past 2 years in China. The past 2 years, China is transforming into a tech superpower. And before that, prior to that. So last 2 years and prior to that. Prior to that, you had many kinds of, 5 or 6 years ago, I was working, took a company in the water treatment space to China called TreeTech 21. They have like biological ways of treating water for municipal and agriculture. That was, they raised some money and they had some successes, but it was in many ways premature. I think that right now, with everything that's happening in China and the opening up and, the China 2025 and the 2030 plans and it's a whole different ballgame. And food and agri-tech, which is a very broad term, it could deals with farming, it deals with post-farming, it deals with the logistics. There's a lot of like drones and AI-driven, data-driven solutions. It's a very, very broad term. That I think is going to be very big. I think the Chinese are going to, because if they want these foreigners to come, they can't take away their IP, revoke their rights and do all of the things that maybe have been done in the past. I think they understand that. And so they're going to be much more open, much more transparent, much more aware of the IP. I think this is also going in the right direction.
And to go in your direction, what you said before, there is not only Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen, but there is also Chengdu in Sichuan. And Sichuan is a big agriculture province where actually it certainly makes sense to go when you are in agri-food. Talking about your past experience, I think there is something I'm very curious about, and I think many people will be curious about, is about your experience in the financial industry between China and the West. Financial, yeah. You have done something which seems very, very difficult or even impossible for many financial companies overseas, is to be able to sell financial products to Chinese when you are an overseas company. And with Zhejiang Zhongda Management, you have been able to set up joint ventures, set up offices for foreign companies to sell financial products. Could you elaborate more about what you did at that time and what is possible to sell when you are financial institutions, a financial company, and why not a fintech actually, to Chinese clients, to give a framework to people? Chinese citizens cannot send more than 50,000 USD every year to outside of China to invest or whatever. If it's education like MBA or whatever to spend, they have to show the invoice first and the justification. And I believe in sometimes they may be even limited by the 50,000 USD. You had some legislation like 4 years ago, QF2 or QF1, I don't remember exactly, in some provinces, making it easier for Chinese citizens to invest abroad, because it's very specific, very cities or provinces, and it was not actually national at all. So could you elaborate more about what you did and to what extent it can be still done?
So this was up until about 5 years ago. We did when I was heading up overseas business development for Zhejiang Zhongda Investment Arm, we did a joint venture with a New York-based registered investment advisor, RIA. And this was a joint venture in the Shanghai Free Trade Zone, which enables some of these things to offer certain, financial products to high net worth Chinese individuals. This was, kind of breaking grounds at that point, and the financial legislation regulation is super dynamic. You really have to be part of it to keep track of it. Since in 5 years, I'm sure it's changed dramatically, right? So that is something that we did then. And, I think one of the first, as far as I know, of course, you have the Goldman Sachs's, the big players, the bulge bracket, they've been doing things for a long time. But the second tier or third tier financial players, I believe that was one of the first groundbreaking kind of joint ventures between an important US and a Chinese player to do that. In the past few years, I've been focusing more on venture capital. So maybe I'll just speak to that a little bit, a few words about VC. Something that we see that I think is very interesting situation with many lessons to be learned from that is that many Chinese, investors, high net worth, people who made a lot of money in real estate and different things, or people in Wenzhou, Wenzhou and Zhejiang province, there are many factories, many business people, family owned.
Yeah, Wenzhou is known for having a lot of business people, and some people in Shanghai say Wenzhou people own a lot of real estate in Shanghai. They are known to be good at business and have small to medium businesses.
Exactly. So people from there, and they want to invest in technology, right? This is something that, or they want to take their businesses, they have a strategic view. They want to transform their businesses. If they have manufacturing, they want to invest in Industry 4.0, for example, or in robotics or something to help upgrade their business to the next generation. This is for strategic, or they just want to be financial investors into technology and make money. So we see many of these things happening. On the one, this is the Chinese side. On the foreign Israeli side, for example, startups sometimes say, listen, why don't we go raise money from Chinese investors? This is something that we hear. So this is there are some problems in this. Exactly as you say, number one is the fact that you have the RMB and USD, and there's a wall in between, and they can only take out $50,000 per year. So if a Chinese investor, they want to invest into an Israeli startup company, how are they going to transfer $1 or $2 million or whatever the case might be? Let's say that they make the decision that they want to, which is not trivial. So how do you do that physically? There are barriers, you can't do that. That's one problem. So then we see also sometimes VC funds in Europe or in Israel have been approached a few times. They say, let's raise capital from Chinese investors. Now, I was partner at Giza Venture Capital until about 3 years ago, which is, I guess, one of the more established VC firms in Israel. And we raised China Israel funding. It was a very, very difficult process. So when I hear VC funds saying, let's raise capital in China, AgriNation said that, and others, I'm very, I say to them that let them first raise capital in the Western ecosystem, and then approach the Chinese investors, because even the big money in China is RMB. And that's not going to help you if you want to invest in US dollars in Israel, let's say. If you want the USD from the Chinese investors, then you're going to Hong Kong or to Singapore. Then it's not mainland anymore, or you're in Hong Kong. So you might as well be in Hong Kong or in New York or in London for that matter. You know what I'm saying? So the Chinese LPs, as we call them, limited partners, those that invest into the VC funds, or those that want to invest directly into tech deals, are very difficult targets for foreign technology companies because of a bunch of reasons. Psychological experience, they're inexperienced in doing that. Maybe they're experiencing investing locally in Chinese startups, and they have many, many of them. Why would they need to risk, investing in a small overseas company that they don't know? There are answers to that. This is a whole conversation, but it is still something that is, not so easy to do. One of the things that the way we approach this is that, first of all, we deal with Israeli startups that already, as I said in the beginning, that have raised some money locally in the local ecosystem, Israeli, US, European VCs and corporations, corporate VCs, at least $1 or $2 million. Otherwise, we say, that don't look to China right now. So they've raised some money or more than that, and they're looking to the market in China. So we're saying don't focus. If you're just raising money, you ought not go to the Chinese market. The chances are not high, and you're going to waste a lot of time. Maybe you'll be successful, odds are not in your favor. So they go and focus on commercializing, focus on market. And then what can happen, and many times happens, is that they have, once they're landing in one of these landing pads in China, they have the time to engage properly with Chinese investors. They have the time to build the trust with them. Sometimes the government comes in, and at that point, RMB can be used to fund the Chinese operations. That is something that can work very, very nicely. So you have the foreign entity landing in China, establishing, Chinese subsidiary, looking around at the market, seeing who are the customers, how do you localize, how do you hire local people? Super important. I see, subsidiaries of Israeli technology companies with Israeli manager and with Chinese managers. It's a different ballgame.
So the way it would be structured, sorry to interrupt, but the way it would be structured is that this company would have raised at least $2 million US in the West, and they would set up a WUFI in China. The WUFI would be, let's say, 70% their shares, and 30% would be owned by the Chinese fund or the China fund. And that's the way it would work. It would be financed and funded by the China fund in China.
Yes, exactly. So basically, we want to keep majority shares held of the Chinese subsidiary held by the parent company. And it would be anywhere from, 49, 40, 30, 25, depending on the structure. But yes, that is very correct. And very important to say that the IP remains in the parent company. IP, because this is a Chinese subsidiary, many times it'll have exclusive license to sell and distribute in China. But that is, also another subject on how do you reconcile the interests of the Chinese investors.
It's still going to be 1 hour. A couple of questions to end the interview, as we sent to you before. First one is, what do you read? What do you use as materials to stay up to date about China business?
I would like to recommend, I'm sure you know these people, very, very good people, Techno. Our friends at Techno, really one of the best. John Artman he's the editor. To be full disclosure, I'm a contributing writer there. As you may have seen, English on Chinese startup and tech, being in Beijing, in Shanghai, covering. 2 thumbs up for them, doing a terrific job. So I read a lot of.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
It's okay.
What book would you recommend about China?
I think
history or about China, generally speaking.
I believe that to be the proper way of being in China and working in China is to know China's history, right? Because it's rich history, it's so unique, and you need to know the history. I think it's very important to learn as much as we can. Geography, because it's critical. Just like if you want to understand what happened in Europe, you need to know the geography, right? The different countries, you need to know the history. So one book that I like very much is, and I can send a link to it if anyone wants. It's called The Search for Modern China. The Search for Modern China by Jonathan Spence. He's a British-American historian of China from Yale, many, many years scholar at Yale University. And that is a book, The Search for Modern China, starts at the end of the Ming Dynasty. I believe it was the 15th century, if I'm not mistaken, the 1400s. And then through Qing Dynasty, talking about the different emperors. And then the 19th century, when we saw China being brutalized by the Western and so on, through the Republic and the Civil War and 1949 and so on, up to the 1990s. A book that I highly recommend.
Thanks. I will download it on Kindle. What is the most surprising experience you had so far in China?
Well, surprising experience is that whenever you think that you've kind of mastered the different kinds of experiences, or that everyone there is to know in your business, or that you think you know what's going on, you realize that you don't. So I think there's a lot of humility here, because you have respect for the size and just the sheer complexity of the country, and you just say, okay, I really need to keep learning. I need to keep my baby very, very open-minded, because when I think I know something, I don't.
If you had the extra time, what would you do in China to build another business? If you had the extra time to build a new business, another one, an additional one, what would you do in China?
I think, something that has to do with the environment. Something that has water treatment or recycling. You see what's happening in Shanghai, for example, with the new rules for recycling. So I think Chinese people are really anxious about the environment right now, and I think it's a good cause. First of all, as a citizen of the world, right? And it's also a good business proposition because whereas in the West, typically clean tech and environmental protection there's not been a lot of success there because the VCs, it's not in their charter. It's very hard to commercialize. It's very hard to make exits and build big valuations. Whereas in China, where the government is so key, there from a business standpoint, it's maybe, I wouldn't say easier, but simpler to build a business that is protecting the environment and so on. And it's also you're doing something important for the world and for people around you.
Interesting. There was a movie about climate change and actually an American movie. And at the end, they were saying one country which could be able to change massively quickly its way of consuming and producing actually would be, surprisingly, China, even though it's one of the country which is producing already still a lot, but it's the country which may change the most quickly. It's already happening with actually new energy vehicles and, as you say, clean tech and recycling. Thank you very much for being with us. It was very interesting. Thanks for taking a bit of your time on Sunday. It's Sunday today, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.
I did. It was a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Matthieu. And I think it was fun. We had good questions, and I hope this was informative to our listeners.
I'm sure it is. Thanks everyone for listening to us. And if you have time, please comment on the podcast, comment on the episode, and put some stars, some good stars if you are happy with the podcast. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.